Would you like to use MBTI to unlock the secrets of romance? Neither would I. It's all a bunch of pseudoscience. Hey everyone. One of the topics that comes up a lot in the typology community is the issue of type compatibility. In other words, are certain personality types more prone to success in a marriage compared to other personality types? As many of you know, I absolutely hate typology, especially Jungian typology and the Enneagram. However, a lot of people out there are giving really toxic advice on this issue of relationship compatibility. So in this video, I wanted to share a few studies and give my thoughts on the topic. Through the years, typologists have proposed several models for type compatibility. Some have suggested that people with opposite dichotomies are most compatible. Others suggest you should date people with like dichotomies. Others have said that you should date someone with the same sensation or intuition preference, and all other dichotomies should be the opposite. And others have suggested that you should have at least two dichotomies or functions in common, and on and on and on it goes. And I've seen some typologists today actually create these elaborate type compatibility grids where you can look up your personality type, and then they will list that some types are your most compatible, some are least compatible, and some are kind of in the middle. So let's take a look at a few studies on this issue of type compatibility. One study found that extroversion and introversion was more related to problems and satisfaction than any of the other three MBTI scales. Another study found that with the exception of a couple of type pairs, quote, there's little evidence that opposites attract or marry, and that similar types, quote, do tend to be attracted. Another study found that couples did not have, quote, significant differences in marital satisfaction according to similarities between spouses and MBTI types. Another study found that, quote, type similarity was more characteristic than type dissimilarity, particularly on sensation, intuition, and thinking-feeling preferences. But they also noted that, quote, marital problems were highly diverse and were not related in any clear way to type patterns in individuals. Another study on couples noted that, quote, the results were not consistent with assertions found in the MBTI literature. Contrary to such assertions, few spouses in couples are the same on all four preferences, and, more importantly, the number of opposite preferences did not predict global or specific marital problems. Now, as many of you know, the Big Five personality model is a little bit different from MBTI. It measures traits on a continuum, and it also has better support in the scientific community. And they've also done some studies with this as well. One study on the Big Five found that, quote, couples high in neuroticism experience lower levels of marital satisfaction, and couples high in conscientiousness are more satisfied with their marital life. I thought that was interesting because my wife and I both score a little bit high in neuroticism on the Big Five, and yet we're very satisfied with our marriage. Another study found that out of all of the traits measured in the Big Five, openness to experience, which people try to compare to MBTI's intuition and sensation dichotomy, quote, appears to play a rather minor role in the romantic context. So the big takeaway after looking at all these studies is that there is no such thing as type compatibility. Yes, some studies will say this type works better or these dichotomies are more important, but another study will contradict that. At the end of the day, it simply does not matter. Any type can have a great marriage. Any type could fail. A big problem is that people treat MBTI and these other typologies as a form of astrology, which in all fairness, it basically is a modern form of astrology. In astrology, they'll talk about 7 things you need to know before you date a Virgo, and the same thing with MBTI, 7 things you need to know about dating an INTJ. It's just the same sort of thing. So yeah, any type combination can work, and that's pretty obvious from the data, from the studies, and so on. But what really concerns me is that there are typologists out there giving very toxic advice on relationships. For example, read what one YouTube guru wrote on his website, quote, no to an ENFJ being married to an INTJ. And if you are, and these are actually your guys' types, I would actually recommend a divorce and potentially moving on from that relationship whatsoever, because it's not going to be fulfilling whatsoever and more likely to cause damage to each other and your children. That is absolutely horrible advice. Not only have studies shown that any type of marriage can work, but there are countless examples of that specific type of marriage relationship working out. Now here's the irony about the guy who wrote that. Not only has he been divorced himself, but after his divorce, he went and dated another girl on YouTube, and that relationship ended in disaster. And after that was over, the girl he dated went on YouTube and literally skewered this guy everywhere, talking about what a creep he is and so on. So despite teaching known pseudoscience and having a series of failed relationships himself, this guy actually goes on YouTube and professes to be some type of expert in Jungian typology and tells people that they should get divorced if they're certain types. And not only that, but when you go to his website, he actually charges $1,000 per hour for relationship coaching. What? The Bible puts it perfectly. If the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into a ditch. So please don't take advice from people like that. I mean, if you're in a marriage and your marriage is struggling, you'd be far better off taking $1,000 and just going on some elaborate vacation and just having some fun rather than pay it to some guy who doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, thankfully, there are at least some people in the typology community who will say, okay, you're right, don't use MBTI to select your mate. But here's what they're going to tell you. They're going to say instead, use MBTI to understand your mate. And I definitely agree with half of their statement because you should definitely seek to understand your mate. However, why on earth would you want to use MBTI to do it? Why not cut out the middleman and just ask questions to your mate directly instead of trying to assume that their every action is because of some dichotomy or non-existent cognitive function or some Enneagram-based fear? Up to 50% of people will type differently on the MBTI the second time around anyway, and it's crystal clear to me that this is all pseudoscience nonsense. I mean, how many of you would use a calculator that's wrong 50% of the time to do your taxes, but we're supposed to use MBTI, which is wrong up to 50% of the time to select our mates or to understand our mates? Second of all, people change over time, so what's it matter? I mean, a lot of research is showing that some traits may stay the same, but some traits may in fact change over your lifetime. One girl was talking about how she used to be the big extrovert in the marriage and she always wanted to get together with friends and do things and so on, while her husband was the big introvert and he just wanted to stay at home all the time. But now they've basically switched and she finds herself wanting to stay at home away from people, whereas her husband likes to go out and hang out with friends and so on. Now, another thing that people will say to me is they will say something like, Ben, MBTI really helped my marriage. And I don't doubt that some people genuinely feel that MBTI helped them, or I don't doubt that maybe their relationship did improve after they started talking about these things, but it's probably not so much MBTI as it is the fact that they were willing to sit down as a couple, they were willing to communicate, they were willing to try to understand each other, try to compromise. That's probably what helped a lot more than the specific information that MBTI gave them. MBTI probably just gave them talking points. The model itself isn't really going to help you. It's really going to corrupt you in a lot of ways. In fact, whenever I released my video saying I was done with MBTI and that it's all pseudoscience, one of the frequent types of messages that I would get from people is they would talk about all the ways that MBTI has corrupted them or affected their life. And one recurrent theme was that of relationships. In fact, I had one INTJ girl and she said that she got into a relationship with a guy and things are going well. They started getting into MBTI, but then the guy, after researching this stuff, he's like, you know what, I think I'd be more compatible with an ENTP, I believe it was. And he broke it off with the girl. And you will see time and time again that people will use typology to select their mates. They will use it to divorce or break up with their mates and all sorts of things. So I think in the long run, you might find that MBTI could end up corrupting you and doing more harm than good. And again, I would say that it's super important to communicate, to express your thoughts and your feelings and opinions, and to compromise and to really understand each other. I just think typology is a really silly way to go about it. Just cut out the middleman, sit down and talk. And that way you're not trying to just figure out, is it her FE, is it because she's an SJ and all this silly stuff. Instead, you're just talking to people and you understand them better when you actually listen to what they have to say instead of trying to project some model onto them. And whenever I met the woman who had become my wife, I never asked her astrology type, and I didn't look up any astrology charts to find out if we were compatible, and I never paid someone to cast a spell. And believe it or not, in 2021, people still pay money to cast love spells and things like that. But I never did that. And I didn't know about typology at the time because I had not yet come across it. And so I never looked at her personality type. I didn't get online and read all these articles about her type and look up type compatibility charts and all this sort of thing. I didn't do any of that. Instead, what I did in our relationship is something that I would hope everyone would do. I simply studied her and I asked her questions and I tried to learn who she was and what she wanted and what her thoughts were, what her fears were, why she did this, why she did that, instead of trying to take some model and project that onto her and having all these stereotypes and assumptions and baggage that come with MBTI and all these other models. Now, my wife and I have been married for 15 years now. We have 2 sons. We do everything together, and we have an extremely, extremely close marriage. My wife is the one human being on this earth that I trust more than anyone, and she's my best friend. We do everything together, and I'm so glad that I didn't let this silly typology stuff influence my decisions or look at her in a certain way or apply a bunch of stereotypes to her. And I really would encourage you all to avoid this typology stuff and just really get rid of it and understand people and enjoy people for who they are. Don't try to psychoanalyze them with this Jungian nonsense. And there's no such thing as type compatibility, despite what some foolish typologists teach. Studies don't really validate that. They contradict each other a lot. But thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe.